So thank you all for coming the very last day of South by Southwest in the morning. I can't even say South by Southwest anymore. It's been 5 long days. So I'm going to talk to you about privacy today. I've been interested in privacy for a very long time. I'm a middle child. So if any of you don't understand that, it's because you had your own room and your own space and didn't have to share everything that you owned. And so one of the great things that we love about the internet is we love its openness. We love the openness of the internet. We love the ability to connect with other people. We love the idea of free speech. It entertains, and democracy. It's the reason, right? The counterculture was interested in it when it first started out. We love that we have the ability to connect with people, our family that's far away, our friends that are far away, to explore and find support groups online, right? For illnesses that we have, our friends have that may be stigmatized. We can grow up online. We find our identity online. For some of us, the openness of the internet lets us find a place where we first belong. So one of the things we love the most about the internet is its openness. One of the things we hate the most about the internet, right, is its openness. The internet reveals things as open to things that we might not want people to see. Like say that you grew up in rural Canada in the 80s. Yes, that is me. And no, that's not been publicly made available before. But we hate, right, that the internet allows us to see information, other people to see information about ourselves that we may not have seen before, right? Information that might be embarrassing, that's not the person that we are anymore, that in aggregate presents a picture that we don't want particular audiences to know about ourselves, right? We leave digital traces everywhere we go, like footprints on the sand, the things that we do, the things that other people say about us, the things that the technology gathers and leaves about us. The issue is the ocean is more forgiving than the internet, right? And that's the paradox of openness on the internet. The thing that we love so much about the internet, that openness, is the thing that actually undermines that very openness. So my goal today, which is kind of counter what I do when I'm teaching my students and counter what you might want to encourage people to do on the last day, is to not pay attention. My goal today is to convince you that it's not that we need to stop paying attention, that we need to look away. And when I'm talking about look away, I'm talking about that particularly as employers, I want to make the argument that we should not be looking online at everybody's information about everything. I'm not talking about looking at job search sites and vetting candidates or looking at LinkedIn. I'm talking about the fact that most employers go online and use a search engine or an aggregator and gather whatever they can find, usually picking the first bits of information and trying to decide who to hire. Now, if you're somebody who's hiring, I totally get it, right? I get that the existing resources that you have aren't working anymore, right? References and recommendation letters don't really provide for most employers the evidence that they need. It was a character check, a skill check. If you call most employers now, right, they may tell you, oh, yes, John worked from this state to this state, which isn't particularly helpful information when you're trying to decide whether to hire somebody or to promote somebody. Or if you get a reference or a recommendation letter, everybody seems to be a diamond-encrusted, unique, special snowflake that is the most perfect thing that has ever walked the planet. And when everybody's a diamond, special encrusted snowflake, it's hard to tell which snowflake you should pick from another. But the internet doesn't really help us with that. So there's 2 reasons I'm going to argue why you should look away, why you shouldn't look at everything online and use it as a tool to try to replace reference checks or recommendation letters as a do-it-yourself background check. You shouldn't do it. The first reason is we don't actually create the kind of organization we want. We don't actually hire the people that we want to hire, create the culture that we want, and achieve the success that we want to have. And the second reason is we don't really create the kind of world that we want to create. So 2 reasons why I don't think that you should look at everything online. So when we go online, one of the things that we're looking at is trying to kind of get a sense, a digital fingerprint. A lot of people, when they think, well, I go online, or why employers go online, is to look at the red flags, to try to figure out if somebody's, red Solo cups, naked pictures, anything inappropriate, right? We're talking about the digital vice police. That's why people think most employers go online, and that's what a lot of employers say that they're doing online, right? Think about it as sex, drugs, and red Solo cups, right? If anybody has information in that picture, even presumably, right, they might have soda. When we see a picture of a red Solo cup, we do not assume that the person is drinking soda or pop, if you're from another part of the country. And so most of us think that it's a background check, right? So you're looking online for the bad, anything that could get my organization in trouble, something illegal in terms of negligent hiring issues that I would be liable for if they did something dangerous or unsafe, or something that puts my brand at risk, right? We know with social media the idea that what our employers do often extends our image in positive or negative ways. But when we talk to people about why they go online and check, they're not just looking for sex, drugs, and red Solo cups. Ostensibly, they say that that's what they are, but they're also looking for other things they don't look like. For example, the crazy cat lady. I've had people say, you know, if you post a lot of information on the cattail walls, I really don't want to hire you. Don't want the crazy cat lady. But we're also looking for good things. We're not just doing a background check to make sure that they're not going to do anything dangerous. We're also looking for good things. Some of those are skills, some of those are expertise, but more often than not, it's something like, you know, I want to get somebody who has it together, you know, like somebody who runs. And so the reason a lot of people go online is to look for the bad, the good, and just that people are present. One of the things that we're really starting to be aware of is that there's an expectation for white-collar professionals in particular, although it seems to be extending, to be present online. And actually, the fact that if you're not present online, it may be more of a red flag than an actual red flag. So having no digital presence, even if your job isn't in PR and marketing or social media, can be as much a factor against you. One recruiter I was talking to was talking about, well, you know, like I had something, and if they have nothing online, I'm wondering, you know, are they some kind of nut job? What are they hiding? Like our assumption is if somebody isn't disclosing something, right, if they're not completely transparent and presumably an open book, our assumption is that they must be hiding something. So that's kind of the first reason people go online, to check. And the one that most of us are familiar with, right? The one that breeds the advice, don't put anything online that you don't want your mother to see. Granted, that depends on what your mother, you know, is like, but the second reason people go online is employers, in particular, or recruiters or people involved, is they're just curious. They're like, oh, I went online to look because I was just kind of curious. That's why. There's not, you know, any reason why in terms of evaluating their skills. I was just curious. And the last and kind of most interesting reason is they go online to connect. There's a subsection of the employers that we've talked to that really talk about, well, I went online and I felt like I got to get to know them. And I can like skip over that first interview because we already really know each other. Except for that the applicants don't know that you're looking and haven't been interacting. If you're gathering information about somebody without them actually knowing you're doing it, you don't have a relationship. It's much more akin to stalking. And people talk about that. Like the job applicants are like, you know, if an employer like walked into your house and like peered in your living room and saw what you're doing on the weekends, we would all think that's creepy. And yet they do that online. They look at what we're doing on weekends, then they look at what we're doing when we're hanging out with our friends. That's creepy. And you're not really getting to know me. And so a lot of employers cyber vet, right? They go online, and they say that they're screening, but they're going online for other reasons, to be curious, to see if you're present, and presumably for some of them to feel like they can kind of skip over the early stages because they feel like they've gotten to know you. But it doesn't actually let us create the kind of organizations we want. Even though we say it's going to protect, we're hoping that it'll protect our brand or protect us from negligent hiring and make sure that we pick the right people. It doesn't actually do that. And there's 3 reasons, right? I'm going to tell you the 3 reasons why. So the first one is the boomerang effect. Basic principle of the boomerang effect is that people suck at making judgments about other people. We suck at it. We think we're really good at it. And people in hiring think they're particularly good at it. And people in leadership think they're even better at doing it. Like, I just have a sense. I know these things. But we have something called the boomerang effect in psychology. And the boomerang effect is basically when you really try not to do something, you actually end up doing it. So for example, most of you probably have heard this if you took intro psych, don't think about a white elephant right now. Please don't think about the white elephant. How many people are thinking of the white elephant? Yeah. A few of you are just ignoring me because it's Tuesday morning. So you didn't hear me say white elephant. Otherwise, you'd probably be thinking about it. But one of the things that we know, right, if you go online, we have access to a lot of information that's protected under equal employment laws, right? Race, in some states, sexual orientation, biological sex, age. Many of these things are protected online, but are protected in employment decisions. But online, we have access to them. And one of the things that's really interesting is that the more that you try to, like, if you're well-intentioned, the more you try actually to not care about sex or race or protected information, the more likely that information is hyper-accessible and actually informs your decisions. We've done repeated experiments on this boomerang effect and hyper-accessibility. And if we try really hard not to make a decision on who to hire based on sex, we're actually more likely to make that decision, undermining that a well-intentioned goal that we have, but not actually accomplishing the goal. So first reason it doesn't work is a boomerang effect. Basically, we suck at judging other people. The second one is procedural injustice. So procedural injustice is the idea that as long as the process is fair, even if people don't like the outcome, they're generally going to be okay. And the other kind of converse side of procedural injustice is even if people like the outcome, so they get the job, they win the award, if they think the process wasn't fair, they're actually kind of more resistant to it. So most workers, when they think about it as workers, even if they hire, or if they're applicants or they're current people getting promoted, if they think that online information was used, most people think that's not fair unless it's LinkedIn or workspaces or things that are kind of work-focused. And so they may take the job, even if they get it and they think the process is unfair, but they're less likely to be engaged. They're going to be less productive, and the turnover is going to be greater. So if you use this process, people tend to think it's unfair, right? Most people are like, yeah, I get it, that's how the way the world works, but they don't really like it. They think it's unfair. They may come to your company, or they may not. So using cyber vetting as a way to get people, especially if they find out, even if they find out after, may actually increase turnover and undermine your organizational culture and your bottom line. And the goal, right, our goal, presumably in going online, is to try to find those people, that intellectual capital that will really help us accomplish our goals. Procedural injustice of cyber vetting doesn't let us do that. Third reason, creepiest slide of the day, is that most of us know that people are watching us. Right? There's this idea of the panopticon that Bentham talked about, where it's a prison where there's a few guards, and at any given time, a prisoner thinks that somebody might be watching them because they can't see if the guard's watching them. But they know at any given time somebody could be watching them. And one of the things that we know is that if people think somebody's watching them, they act differently, right? And most people are kind of familiar with Bentham's panopticon in terms of the prison, and we talk about it in terms of the information panopticon with the internet. But what they didn't realize is when Bentham talked about it, his argument was that it was a way to have minds control other minds. And he thought it could be, presumably could be extended to educational institutions, organizations, government structures, things Snowden talked about, right? The way that if we surveil people, they will act differently. And so my argument is that we should look away, right? Because by looking at all this information online about people, it's compelling, it's habitual. We think that we're good at it, but we're not really not. But that looking away may actually do a better job at helping us create the kind of world we want. And so this idea of looking away is not a new idea. There's a sociologist called Erving Goffman, and I'm Canadian, so I was super excited when I realized after the fact that he was born in Canada. Something, when you're like the little brother country, you get all excited about. And Erving Goffman is really well known for studying impression management. So how do people manage their impressions? In particular, he used the metaphor of the theater, that how we behave in a front stage space is directed to our particular audiences. We manage cues, entrances, and exits to kind of communicate the impression that we're giving to people and don't let them see the backstage, all the messy, crazy behind the scenes. The thing with the internet is, right, it messes with that front and backstage stuff. And so one of the things that Goffman talked about in kind of a pre-internet era was this idea of civil inattention. And he used the metaphor of kind of a subway in public spaces. How many of you have ridden on like crowded public transportation or subway? All right. So when you go in a subway, I used to live in Boston, and one of the things that you notice is people are aware of the other people around you, but like if you actually look at people, you'll get like the no signal, right? You're not supposed to kind of engage with other people in public transportation. You're aware of them, you try not to bump into them, but you do your own thing. You avert your gaze. And the goal of civil inattention was that in public space, Goffman argued, the most respectful thing that you can do is to acknowledge that somebody has personal boundaries, even if it's public and open. That the most respectful thing that you can do is to acknowledge that person has a right to space, even in a public situation. And you see this most obvious when people violate it. So my first day coming down, I live in town. I took the bus down from South by, whole bunch of people from like around the world talking in different languages. And there was this one loud voice that was engaging with every other person on the bus every time they came on. How are you doing? What's going on? Like, look at, I hurt my knee. And you can see the entire bus like, what is she doing? And so because she's violating, right, a norm that in a public space or in a crowded city, we don't look online. Or we look away from each other out of respect for them. And we see this actually in the London subway. There was actually a graffiti artist that was putting up stuff, signs. Don't acknowledge fellow passengers or sustain eye contact beyond 2 seconds. Like, please respect urban solitude. Or more bluntly, stop staring. Right? Now, Goffman talked about these ideas, this idea of civil inattention, well before the internet exists. But what's kind of the genius of Goffman and his ideas that extend to today is he actually anticipated something he called the unboothed street phone. What would happen if we took a telephone and it wasn't tethered to something and we walked around with it everywhere? I don't know, like, could you imagine lots of people walking around with phones that are not attached to things? And he goes, and it creates a complicated situation, right? So we have this conversation going on and information passing back and forth with one audience, whoever's on the other end of the phone, who we don't always know, right? Because if we're broadcasting that information on social media, we're not always aware of who's seeing it when. But then we're also interacting in other spaces. And so one of the things that's interesting about that, and what I call it, is digital civil inattention, right? How can we acknowledge those digital public spaces that we're all part of that appeal to democracy and openness, that let us find support, right, for stigmatized mental illness or stigmatized addiction, that let us kind of try out those parts of ourselves that other people might not think fit with what it means to be a professional. And so we need to look away. And again, I want to say it's not a new idea. So it's not a new idea in terms of sociology, but it's also not a new idea in terms of hiring people. Back in the 1960s and 70s, just before then, people in symphonies and orchestras were predominantly male. Predominantly male. And the argument was that it was just that, well, men are just better at instruments, they have stronger lung function, they're just more talented, they have more technique, we're hiring the best people because we can hear them. And somebody originally came up with an experiment, and it's now kind of standard practice. They put a screen between the people assessing and the people performing. And in the most interesting situations, they also actually put down a rug so that or made people walk in bare feet so you can't hear the click, 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 click of the heels, right? Which makes most of us think of our elementary school teacher, right? Oh, no, she's coming back. But the goal is to create a screen so that the information you needed could come through, and the information that was irrelevant would stay out. And one of the things they found is as soon as they started doing it, almost equal numbers of men and women went to the other side. Almost equal numbers of men and women. Now, those of you involved in hiring are like, oh, that's all fine and good, but once we get past kind of the resume application stage, at some point we're going to see them in an interview, whether that's online or elsewhere, and we're going to have access to this protected information. This screen thing in the orchestra, even if you only did it during the first stage and then looked at like their performativity because you wanted to see how they engaged with the audience, still dramatically increased the number of women relative to men. So even if in the early stages or in other strategies you provide protected space, a screen that lets in the information you need and keeps out the information that kind of screws with our biases, we end up getting what we want. And we've done this before, right? Background checks. By the way, the semantic web doesn't work yet. If you look at background checks, this is like the dominant thing. It's a really bad academic joke. See, that's funny. I'm a dork, which you know from the early slide. But we do background checks. We've done this for a long time. My colleagues are laughing their heads off at me being the dork. We've done this a long time, right? We check Social Security, we do drug tests, we do driving records. And one of the things that's interesting about this that changes it, right? If you don't pass a credit check, you probably won't get the job, but at least you know what's going on. Because one, you have to sign off on getting any of these checks. So you're aware that they're happening, and you know what information you're using. And second, we have due process. So if you get a negative result as one of these checks, the organization has to let you know legally. And so our goal is to figure out how can we put up a screen with this online information, given our habits of going online, given our desire to find more information, how can we accomplish this? And the first one is as workers, right? We're on the other side of the screen. How can we screen out information, right? I would love to get to the place where I think nobody would look online, but at other things, but I don't totally think we're going to get there. But as workers, we need to be aware, right? And not necessarily create the ideal white-collar professional self on all spaces on the internet. So people do this in different ways. Some people generate such a high level of content in their LinkedIn profile, they count on the fact that people are lazy. We are lazy, right? We tend to be very efficient. So when we go in a Google search or a Bing search, we tend to look at the top 5 things. We might go to the second page. Depends on the day. But generally, people don't go very far. So if you can push some information to the top of the page, that can help. Another thing that people do that tends to work well if you have a lot of time is they construct 2 identities. The people I see who do this the most often are actually married women. They have their married name and their maiden name, and they create separate email accounts, which are unique identifiers, right, to search on, and separate names, and they can construct that identity online so that they're not getting judged on the basis of being a parent, for some of them, versus their profession, because there's pretty consistent evidence that women get a mommy penalty. If you have a kid and you're female, you're considered less competent. If you have a kid and you're male, you're considered more competent. So you can manage that. The other thing that people do is get really damn good at your job. If you're really damn good at your job, and there are not a lot of people who are damn good at their job, it kind of doesn't matter. So one of the things when we were doing research is we found out there's a huge shortage of elevator technicians. Who knew? And when there's a huge shortage in the economy, employers just need a butt in the seat. And so as long as you didn't commit like a felony or a horrible crime, they were willing to take you. And so you have much more space to play if you're really, really good at what you do. And if what you're really good at doing, not other people are good at, and the economy cares about it. It's like being good at making wagon wheels. You could be awesome, not a lot of people do it, but the economy still wants it. And if you can do those things, you can construct spaces both for yourself, right, to have a work role and a professional identity and fulfill that expectation to be present online, but also have all the other parts of yourself. How do we put up a screen as employers? And there's a couple things. The first thing we need to do is know what you want. And this is not new to the internet existing. When we go to hiring, we don't often know what we want. We say we know it when we'll see it. We'll kind of get it when we see it. People are notoriously bad at interviewing. We like to interview in the States. And one of the ways to do it is be really specific. And there's actually a lot of research if you write everything down on Post-it notes and index cards, 1 trait per each card, and then post them on the wall and prioritize them as a group, you'll get a better understanding of what's most important to you, and you can aim at the things that are most important for the job. And it seems like, okay, that's going to take a lot of time, but most of the time organizations have core skills that trade across positions, because there's the technical skills, but then there's also some cultural components that you want. Plus, if you hire somebody that's not a good fit, so even if they look great on the internet, but they're not a good fit in terms of what you really want, turnover is expensive, problematic, and often fraught with a lot of legal issues. The third thing that's kind of interesting is there's a growth in something called social media background checks. There's actually third-party companies that do that now. This is actually a letter from 2011 from the Federal Trade Commission. And so there's genuine concerns about negligent hiring. If you hire somebody that has done something in the past that you could reasonably be aware of, you're responsible for that. And we haven't really sorted out in the courts whether the internet counts as being reasonably aware. But this third-party company follows the rules that the Federal Trade Commission set up for credit checks, that you have to let somebody know that you're looking online, and that there's a due process requirement. The other thing that's wonderful about this is when they go online, they actually block out any protected information. So if you see the picture of the screen, they'll actually block out. This one's for a particular company called Social Intelligence. I'm not actually advocating for them. I don't know them well, but is one of the first companies that's doing that. So if you are concerned about some of the legal issues in terms of negligent hiring, that's one way you can do it. The third way is, what if it's a bona fide job qualification? Somebody has asked me when I was talking about this talk with somebody, what about somebody who's a political communication expert, right? You're in the social media and you say something in social media space, it can get your political candidate in an awful lot of trouble. If it's a bona fide job qualification, you just let the person know as part of the job description. You'll get around the procedural injustice issue. It's like part of the expectation of this job is that you have a platform during this time that's consistent with the representative or the person that you're representing. And so a lot of it is really just being strategic about being straightforward with the people that you have, about your process and about what's needed for the job, as well as creating screens so that we don't tap into those psychological biases that we have. And then there's a requirement for us as the public, right? So some of the reasons that employers are really stressed out and trying to figure out, like, how's this person going to compromise my brand, is because when an employee of a company, even if they're not on company time and not necessarily affiliated with the company at the time, does something that compromises our brand, the public seizes on it, right, and pushes it into the internet stratosphere, and every so often it explodes, right? And so there's reasons why organizations are afraid. So if we want to think about it in terms of society, what kind of society, what's our role in creating, right, that kind of cycle of shame and escalation in talking about it? So the argument is to look away, but that doesn't mean never look. It means intentional inattention. I got to change that phrase, it's hard. It means intentional inattention so we can focus on creating things that matter. It's about creating a screen, right, that lets in what we want to have, that accomplishes our goals for the particular culture that we want, the particular skills we want, and also protecting the interests of our organization, which we do have a responsibility for, while not allowing in information that appeals to our biases, creates a sense of injustice, and actually encourages team turnover. So the question I want to know is, what kind of organization do you want to create? And that should be the starting point for your decisions about whether to look online. And what kind of world do you want to create? Look away. That's my argument. Thank you. If you have questions, if you could come up to the microphone so that everybody can hear, that would be great.
I work for a large financial services company in the Midwest, and it's a fairly conservative work environment. Mm-hmm. Now that we've had a few years to be social online, we're noticing, my colleagues and I are noticing a trend where people are starting to manufacture their online personas mm-hmm. and control them so tightly that they almost become caricatures or, in some cases, almost fiction, because they're so concerned about people's perceptions of them. Do you think that in some ways we're starting to come kind of full circle in that, it kind of reminds me of, Victorian society where people put on such artificial personae that you never really got to know anyone, right, until the last possible moment before you married them. And then even then, you never know. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if we're seeing sort of the 21st century version of that.
So my research doesn't speak directly to that, but I would argue that in many ways we are, right? And so another reason people go online is they want access to that authentic person. But if we think employers are going online, most of us don't have enough money to not work, right? And so we construct something because we need employment to get a job, to feed ourselves, feed our family, have a house. And so we are constructing that. And some of the interviews we did were in the Midwest, and there is a more conservative environment in parts of that. And so people have created these caricatures, and that's kind of the argument. If We have, if everybody expects employers are looking online, even if they're not looking, we kind of lose all this other depth of society and connection, especially for people that might not have somebody that's like them or interested in the things we do. I hadn't thought of it in terms of Victorian society, but that's a really interesting parallel. History is always fascinating.
I guess you could say I'm in marketing. I end up working with a lot of small businesses who are not gung-ho about their online presence. They're not really embracing social media. So most of them seem to be looking to do as little as they can get away with, maintenance-wise, and still look normal, look like the rest of the businesses out there. What are your thoughts on that philosophy? Do you see it changing, and what do you think normal is?
Normal changes all the time, right? We're in Austin. Well, I'm Canadian. My husband always said like, you're weird to me for all the time we were dating. And then suddenly one year is like, I've been reinforcing you. You think that's a good thing. But in terms of your question, there's kind of a presumption, right, that organizations should be visible.
Right.
But not every organization needs to be visible, right? So if they're meeting their goals and accomplishing what they want to accomplish, and being online and social media doesn't impact their client base or their stakeholder group or their key performance indicators, then I don't think they should be online. Like, the pressure to be visible and be transparent is a huge one, but not every organization needs to be visible. There's huge multinational corporations that people don't know anything about. They don't have web pages, they don't have social media, because they do stuff like, make fortune cookies or make other things, that napkins and stuff that we don't think about every day, but they don't necessarily need visibility because they can get enough employees and get enough clients without it. And so it's really an assessment of what the business needs and what they want to accomplish.
Cool, thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. My question regards the federal, your reference to the Credit Reporting Act that basically gives data aging and transparency in the reporting of your data to other entities. Have you run across any research that would expand this to data brokers and your online presence, like the Facebooks, the Googles of the world, where they would age your data and kind of kick it out and give you more access to it?
No, I haven't. It would be interesting, right? One of the things that we're actually trying to do at the center is make my information more visible to me, where it's going and who's aggregating it. And right now that's kind of invisible. Right. And so that's kind of what I would like to see in addition to like checks, because social media checks, background checks, credit checks are themselves imperfect. They're better than nothing. But I would also like to see, and that's just a personal statement, I would also like to have more of a sense of where my information's going, who has it, and how it's being combined.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, in your various research, for children that are, say, 10, 11, 12 right now, just coming into this brave new world, is there any of your peers, or is there any study about how to sort of proactively navigate it from a perspective of not going to the extreme of making a truly artificial persona, being mindful of how you are perceived, and along those lines?
So there's a couple things. Actually, one of my colleagues right there, Katie, who's sitting beside you, you should talk to her after. She did a talk on parenting online. And there's also a game that actually can help your kids navigate it, which we use based on data from a threat system, like where people had identity theft and stuff. But some of it, right, the argument that I make to my students a lot of time, the internet is not completely different from what we've done before, and it's not completely the same, right? There's characteristics about the broadcast, the visibility, the persistence, but at the same time, there's kind of a choice and consequence thing, right? And so some of the argument is that if we help our children understand the consequences of more concrete things, right? When you hit somebody else, or when you say something nasty, or somebody sees you do something not nice, that you can then extend it to more abstract things. In the same way that when kids learn about emotional hurt by first learning about physical hurt, right? Think about like when your kid skins their knee, that hurts. Later on, when a lot of, and I have a daughter as well, so some of this is my own, what I've used in my own life, is when you have when somebody else hurts you, you talk about, remember when you skinned your knee and how that hurts? This also hurts because it's the same thing, it just hurts in your heart. And so there's ways to kind of extend the concrete to the abstract. But I would recommend talking to Katie because she has a lot more knowledge in that area than I do.
Hi there.
Hi.
You talked a lot about pre-hiring and just the hiring process, but I'm really interested in what your thoughts on are the post-hiring process, as far as like, I mean, a new generation of millennials are hitting the workforce, and sometimes they feel like they have an inherent right to be brand advocates, and the digital natives, so they're showing up more and more as from their personal, personas online. And what your thoughts on are as far as like policing as from a brand perspective.
Could you, I don't know that I totally got your question. Can you like rephrase it in a different way?
What are your thoughts on policing as far as post-hiring?
Oh, like an organization surveilling you once you're in? So I used to work for a non-for-profit, and I also worked in for-profit and had my own business. But I now work for a government organization, and it's it's directly stated that I get observed. Like every email I sent is open records access. If any of you want to know what I said in my email, you can just tap to submit a request and you can know. And so my argument would be a lot of organizations are doing it. Sometimes organizations have to put policies in place for legal protections. But regular policing is going to probably undermine your culture, particularly people who think that they have a right to other spaces. And so getting really creative about it is important. In terms of the generational thing, we're actually not seeing a difference in terms of generation. It's in terms of people's efficacy with the technology. So somebody that's 40 and spends a lot of time on social media and is interested in privacy probably has more similar attitudes to somebody who's 20 and is called the digital native. And not everybody who's 20 is a digital native. There's actually not a lot of evidence for that. And it's, for some students, some of my students, it's a ton of pressure, right? I'm supposed to be great at everything online. And some of my students are incredibly talented at it. And so I think that if you get really good at what you do, you can start choosing to not go to those organizations that kind of engage in policing. And on an employer end, I think that some of the employers can advocate, like, hey, we don't look at that other stuff, and this is why. And that I think that is going to appeal particularly to technologically aware people that are engaged in that space, that employer values that I have other interests and other things in my life. So I would be kind of not for it, even though I'm in an institution that very clearly does it. And also, people are incredibly creative. Technological controls don't tend to last very long. Right? So you just use your smartphone that you bought yourself, because we have the whole bring your own device movement, and then you email on your smartphone. People are creative. It's the awesome thing about people. They tend to not like being repressed. Hi.
How do you manage yourself online so that you give off, a good light to employers and stuff while still, posting friendly things on social media? Because I know I like to be stupid with my friends on social media. Mm-hmm. But how do you do that and at the same time present yourself in a way that you want to be presented to employers or people, stalking you that you can control?
So do you want to know how I do it or how different people do it?
Whatever you want. I'll listen to both.
One of the ways that people can do it really effectively is through noise. If you generate a lot of stuff that's relative to your career, people will kind of ignore other things.
Okay.
And so, because it'll move to the top, right? If you can kind of figure out the search algorithm a little bit, it'll move to the top of the scale. In my career, for example, any conference I go to, that stuff moves up to the top. Yeah. And so people don't look much past that. The other thing that people do is some people construct multiple lives online. So they have different accounts and so they have multiple personalities. Some people just kind of ignore it because they operate kind of in a white professional thing all the time. I don't think everybody does that. And the fourth thing that I think is kind of the most effective and gets you the most kind of bang for your buck, but not a lot of people do it, is that getting really good at what you do, and the other stuff kind of doesn't matter. If you have a rare skill set and you're really good at it, people are less concerned than the other thing. Because if you can drive key performance and accomplish the goals that they want, they're less interested in the other stuff. Granted, if you commit a felony and it's online, that's not going to happen. But I mean, some of the employers we were talking to were like, well, I was going to give this lady a promotion, and then I noticed that she was getting a divorce because I was looking at the court records. So I decided not to talk to her about it because I didn't think she really had time to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, right?
Yeah.
But if you can do those other things, right? Construct other information that moves to the top of the search, which is actually not that hard. Create multiple personalities, which some people like. It's kind of high maintenance. Or get really damn good at something. And hustling and being skilled at something will get you far. Almost every employer I talk to is like, can you, because I have a lot of students, it's like, who can you get me that hustles? If you can get somebody that, especially at the entry level, somebody who hustles will get really far. And don't commit a felony.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Thank you.
So isn't it, when you create the multiple identities, I mean, that you're just breaking the rules because they say you're not allowed to, but I mean, from an employer's perspective, if you did get discovered at that, then that seems like it's a high risk of being discovered, and if you are discovered, it's viewed very badly.
So a couple things. One, I do have two names, and they're both legal names, and they're both, so at least for me, I could have two personalities if I wanted to. I just confessed to having multiple personalities on recording. Yes, there are some policies. In terms of violating policies, people have done that for a long time. Boyd talks about it a lot in her work with teenagers. As for employers discovering it, it's not against the law. And honestly, most people aren't that good at it. And so especially if the names are really different, that can be really helpful to you, right? Unless they can tie, and most employers can't do this, although it's becoming easier with big data, which is why I want kind of the bigger policies around it. But I don't actually think most employers will figure it out. Most of my students, most people who know me don't actually know my other name. They do kind of now at UT, but it's hard to find.
Actually, you touch on the aspect of multiple identities that big data is making it easier. And if you're going to try to create multiple personalities online, use different devices. Don't use the same computer. Don't use the same phone to create different devices, because big data will match them together and identify you. Sorry.
Yeah, and I agree, right? With aggregation, that's going to become more of a situation. The question is whether employers are using that, which gets at bigger issues of policy and the services that we're providing. But at the same time, lots of the same people use the same computer. So my identity gets messed up with my husband's a lot, which is also really fun to do with your partner, by the way. They get really cool search results. Mess with it. But there is a bigger need for policies. But I think as an employer, right, as an employer, what's the return on your investment for looking at that information, right? And paying for that big data service or doing it is probably not going to give you the return that you want. Most of us want to satisfy. As an individual, they're probably not going to spend their time on it. We would love to think we're diamond-encrusted snowflakes, but they probably won't. That's a moment when you're like, I'm really glad they don't think I'm special. The higher you get up, the more visible it will become, but yeah, I don't have an easy answer, is basically the conclusion.
So I'm just wondering if we can invert this and ask, how can we, as individuals, manage the data that is out there as a result of our online persona? And how can we harness it and sort of further our own purposes, or sort of better our lives, I guess, not to be too vague about it, but.
Yeah. So the question is really, how can we harness our own data? It's actually really hard, right? So right now, most of the time, information's not considered like ours. As consumers, we talk about it being our information, but like, for example, one organization that I worked for, I asked them to blind my information because I had a concern with a client, a former client. And they said, oh, no, we own that information. I'm like, you don't own my name and my address. But that's kind of a, once it's in their hands, it's as if it's a commodity that they own. And so one of the arguments both that the center's making and people are making broadly is, how do we move some of that control back into the hands of the people that face the consequences of it, right? Because the organizations with big data and aggregating get a lot of benefits out of it in targeted marketing and the other things that they do. And we get what, like a 10% off coupon for dry cleaning? And so we haven't totally figured that out yet. One of the, and there's the other, so this is somewhat dystopian. The other thing is, even if we kind of block and control it, we get judged because there's no presence, or we get judged on the basis of our friends. So what our friends say and how attractive our friends are actually predicts whether people think we're smart. And so even if you lock down your own picture, how attractive your friends are based on our norms of attractiveness. So for me, some of it is just being aware of it, having somebody else look that doesn't have your search parameters. And so then you can kind of get a jump on it in an employment situation. In the same way, like if you have a break in your resume, you bring that up, you shine a lantern on it. Like you might see this, and this is why that existed, and it was from a past life or whatever. Because we all have like kind of multiple lives. Who I was in middle school, thank goodness, is not who I am today.
It almost sounds like the credit reporting paradox. I mean, I wonder if we're moving toward one day getting, instead of a free credit report once a year, you get a free like big data report that you can sort of work through, right?
And we're trying to work on that so that we can, it's, again, credit reports aren't perfect, right? But at least having kind of a consolidated way to assess where it is, how it's being used, what is the particular threats you should be concerned of, and where the opportunities are, is a good way. Because we don't have our own market, most of us don't have enough money to have like a marketing team that many political candidates or other large organizations have. But that's the problem we haven't solved yet, but it's one that I think is kind of key to this issue. How do we kind of gain some agency over our own information so that we might get the benefits as well as the costs, instead of just the costs. Can you guys all come to my like class? You're like so engaged. Love it.
I'm sorry if you covered this earlier because I was a few minutes late, but you were talking about the screen and overcoming bias. I know that there's some other strategies that women can use, like using initials instead of their names.
Yep.
If I'm not in a situation where it's a job interview, but it's rather I'm a business owner or a consultant, and I just want to kind of further my own marketing and my options with potential clients, are there other strategies you might recommend for women?
Yeah, so you get at a good point, right? People who are employed by somebody are going to get vetted by current or prospective employers.
Right.
People who are entrepreneurs and consultants are going to get vetted by clients.
Right.
And so in that situation, I would really leverage getting trusted networks. So one of the things that's really interesting, in addition to that, having attractive friends thing makes you seem more, if you're the most attractive, it doesn't help you. But if your friends are more attractive than you, people think you're more attractive and therefore more intelligent. Which is, the point is, use that network. So if you can get access to...
So I should cultivate pretty people.
Okay, so I'm going to move from the metaphor. No, because then you would not be friends with me. Again, you've seen my photo. I saw some of you tweeting it too. Is that the network matters a lot. So you can kind of extend the attractiveness metaphor to if you're connected to people that person respects and trusts. So if you can figure out, say you want Bob as a client, and you know Bob, these 3 people trust Bob, if you can get in with them, if they see that you're connected to Bob's trusted friends online,
Just having that social proof.
they'll assume
Yeah.
that Bob trusts you, you're more trustworthy, even if the person just says yes to every LinkedIn connection. So sometimes people don't assess how the LinkedIn connection happened. They just assume, oh, they're more trustworthy. I mean, when I talk to people, it's like, well, I saw he was connected to somebody I know, so I knew he was trustworthy. Like, lots of people just connect with people on LinkedIn the same way they do on Facebook to get as many people as possible, right? And so you can actually, one of the strategies I would do is actually build a network around targeted clients. And you can use, that's what I would use, not the pretty people thing.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I'll be here afterwards, and I look forward to talking to any of you that have more questions.